talk to us about Gulf United. How was it born, and how did we get to where we are today?
In the first year, we won Division 3, then we got promoted to Division 2, and then we got promoted to Division 1. We had Iniesta coach, we've had Douglas Costa, Ashley Young, Jesse Lingard. It goes on, basically. We went from being with the 19s to every day was training with the first team. He was a first team player. We've had players go on trial to Newcastle, Crystal Palace, Getafe, Austrian Premier League, the Pro League here, etc. Like, we just had a player signed from the Pro League in January. Here's 16 full game clips in stadiums against top level professionals. You know, how can they say no to that, basically? That confidence needs to be there, even if it's fake.
Welcome back to another episode here. Today, I'm joined with co-founder and director of Gulf United FC, Jack Shiels. Jack has built a powerhouse academy in Dubai that serves as a bridge for players to professional and collegiate athletics as well. Jack, welcome. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much for having me. As you said, you know, I was born and raised in Manchester in the UK, youngest of 4 brothers. So I didn't have much of a choice of whether to be into football, but obviously biggest blessing that's ever happened to me. And now myself and my 2 brothers are out here, and one of my best friends growing up from the UK. And the 3 of those guys actually started the academy in 2019. And then as soon as I finished playing in the States, which was 2020, I graduated December 19. Then I went on trial in the USL after that, immediately after I came over, and it's been a ride since then, put it that way.
Fantastic. So the burning question here, talk to us about Gulf United. How was it born, and how did we get to where we are today?
Cool. So to kind of set the scene of Dubai and how it all works, basically the population over here is only around 10% locals. So there's a 90% expat population. And when I used to come over so I played at Furman. And when I was still at Furman, I used to come over and visit my oldest brother who was here at that time, and he was coaching for an academy. And at that time, there was no expat professional teams. So no privately owned clubs, only clubs that were owned by essentially the government of Dubai, similar to how it works in Saudi with the PIF, with the public fund. And there was these amazing facilities, you know, for example, from the UK, when we go to the US, we talk about how amazing the facilities are. But here, you know, even the pitches that you play on are just like amazing. Like you wouldn't find them anywhere in the UK unless you were in the Premier League, basically. So for me, it was always a really exciting thing to come over and train and things like that. But there was no prospect of really being a professional here or anything like that, because, you know, they would sign a few foreign players for each of these local teams, but nothing, you know, they might have 3 or 4 players and the rest are local. So when my brothers started the academy, they'd seen me go out to the US, and they'd seen how amazing it was in terms of the journey that I'd have. And essentially they said, why don't we start an academy, which is essentially a pathway provider. So it was going to be an academy at the time, which is, and it still is to this day, very kind of, we call it top heavy. So we have players from 4 all the way to 18, but we always have way more players over 14, because it's all about, you know, Gulf United is the club who can send you to professional teams. Gulf United is the club who can send you to the US or Spain or UK or wherever you want to go. Basically, we've got links. So they started the academy in 2019, and I came over officially in February 2021, and I came over as an academy coach, basically. But at that time, the FA of this country reached out to our academy and a lot of other academies and said, we're going to create Division 3. So the year before, they'd created Division 2, which was all private clubs. And they said, we're going to create Division 3. You can pay this fee to join the league. It wasn't anything crazy at all. And, you know, if you want to have a pathway for your academy players, then this is the way. It's going to be promotion and relegation. And it was like a dream message to get. But of course, we had to decide, you know, how are we going to do this? Are we going to pay players salaries and things like that? It's obviously all the burning questions. So they came to me and said, I know you've kind of came over as a coach, but do you want to play for the team? So I said, okay, no problem. I've only stopped playing, you know, 3 or 4 months ago at that point, because I was playing for a team in the UK, and I became the captain of the team, which entered Division 3. And then in the first year, we won Division 3, then we got promoted to Division 2. Everybody was saying we were going to get relegated and it's too difficult and all this stuff. And then we won Division 2, and then we got promoted to Division 1. So the first 2 years, we ended up in Division 1, which was basically at that time, every private team who'd gone up came straight back down, because those teams, as I said before, are government funded, which means that they get basically like a bursary every year from the sports sector, where they give that money to, the teams, and then they spend the money on the players. And the whole point is to kind of encourage them to have good sports in the country, which is, it's a great initiative. But for us, of course, going up to that league, the question is, how are we going to survive in a league where everybody's funded and we're not? So, of course, we had the academy, which is, when I say academy, I mean basically the same as club soccer in the US, where the players will pay. But with that payment, they get the 3 or 4 times a week. They get the amazing facilities. They get the full-time coaches, different to the grassroots in the UK, where it's usually someone's dad or whatever. So anyway, we went to Division 1. For me personally, I played 2 seasons in Division 1. It was an amazing experience, but obviously as a director of the club, it was also a bit strange, to go from a board meeting to training. It was a bit, so for me this year, I've stopped playing and I've kind of more focused on the director side of things and kind of building the club, which has been amazing. And it's also been quite rewarding to be able to watch all of the, teams play. And obviously you don't have that chance when you're playing. So anyway, in 2023, at the time we'd had a YouTube docuseries as well, which was essentially documenting the road to the promotion and things like that. And it got quite a lot of traction. Like the final video, for example, had nearly 2 million views, and we started to get loads and loads and loads, like thousands of basically young players asking for trials, emailing their videos and all that type of stuff. And we said to the FA, as much as this is great that we're now in Division 1, we have basically lost the ability to bring any young player over who is, let's say, for example, come straight out of school wanting to do a gap year. Because, let's say in Division 1, Quincy Promise was playing in there last season. Balotelli's playing in there this season. This is a super high level league. Andrea Pirlo is a manager in the league at the time, right now in this season, So it's not a league where you can just come from school and go and play. And also there's foreign restrictions. So you can usually have about 10 foreign players per team. And again, that means that if you're a young, unproven player, it's just not going to happen. So we said to the FA, what can we do about this? And they said, you know what, we'll give you a second license to start again in Division 3, and you can have a Gulf United B. So we said, okay, no problem, let's do that. But again, then the same question came up. How on earth are we going to fund that team? That seems like even more of an impossible task when you have, let's say, 30 players coming from US, Canada, Australia, wherever, and they all need housing, they all need food, all that type of stuff. And for us, a big part of kind of success has been that we've done things very professionally all the way through. So the standards of, the coaches, the standards of the facilities, the standards of the overall standards of making sure things are done professionally, we made a kind of promise to ourselves and a pact between us that we would never compromise on the quality of the programs and the quality of the development that the players can receive, basically. So we looked around the world for models where, there was different ways of essentially this type of program working. And we found in Spain and in the UK and in Italy and things like that, they had these international programs where the players would essentially take care of their own costs for the whole year. And then that would allow them to play within that academy and that development environment for that year. But what we found was that because of, let's say, visas, because of difficulties with rules, et cetera, most of the players who were coming from, let's say, US, Canada, Australia, which is some of our biggest markets, they were going there, and regardless of how well they were playing, they were finding it almost impossible to actually play for the official team that, they're going to train with, for example. Whereas for us in this country, of course, they just started those 2 private leagues, Division 2 and 3, and therefore the barrier to entry to register in the league is extremely low. So low that you could be here on a tourist visa and register. You wouldn't even need any sort of work permit or anything like that. You could just be here. As long as you're in the country, you can register in the league. All you need is your international clearance from your club back home or whatever. So we said, why don't we create an international program for gap year students, for players who are after university, before university, not going to university, whatever it is. But the difference is those players will be the actual players on our B team. So we did that. We had no idea what to expect, of course. We brought a group of 30 players over in the first year. They finished mid-table in Division 3, which we thought was, good. But then the second year, we had a much stronger group of players because of the awareness of the club. And, for us as a club, one of the things that brings us a lot of kind of publicity is we are kind of associated with some of the game's biggest names, basically. So in terms of a lot of the Dubai as a whole is the number one tourist destination in the world in terms of numbers. So, for example, Dubai Mall is the number one tourist destination. So a lot of these Premier League players, Champions League players, etc., come into Dubai, and a lot of the time they're looking for somewhere to train or to be coached or whatever. And we have become the team that they go to. So, for example, last year we had Gundogan training, we had Iniesta was coaching our under-19, so the players on this program. We've had Dzeko, we've had Mo Daoud, we've had Douglas Costa, Ashley Young, Jesse Lingard. It goes on, basically. So again, as you can imagine, there's a lot of players, thousands per year, many, many thousands per year, who want to come and join this program and be around that type of environment. So because of that, the second year, which was last year, we had a really strong group of players come in, and that pro development program team actually got promoted to Division 2 as well. So they came in, and these players on this international program, they basically came third in the league. They went up, and now our pro development team sits in Division 2. Now, because of the success of both teams, which is obviously 3 promotions within 4 seasons, which is unheard of anywhere in the world, basically, the FA then reached out to us again and said, okay, why don't you now start competing in the youth leagues as well? Bear in mind, there's no private club in the youth leagues. So to give you some examples, so for example, Al Wasl is a league in there, which is a local team, but their sporting director is Eric Abidal. Obviously, his last job was sporting director of Barcelona. So as you can probably tell, the level of the teams and the funding and all that type of stuff is huge. So for us, this was a kind of a real compliment to hear that. And Alain is in there, for example. They won the Asian Champions League 2 years ago. So we said to them, okay, where can we join? Last year we joined the 21s. This year we joined the 19s as well, and the 16s. So now we have 16s, 19s, 21s pro teams, and we're the only private club in those leagues. So yeah, basically that's where we're at. At the moment, the best thing for us is 19s and 21s is basically a development hub. So we say to the players, and we kind of make it clear with the club philosophy that it's not about the results in the 19s and 21s. The 19s and 21s is a development hub to see how many players that we can move up to the first team, basically. So we've been able to do that very successfully. And in the last 2 years, we've had 21 players from those 2 teams playing our first team. And in Division 1 this year, for example, we have the 5 youngest players who've played minutes in Division 1 are all from our club. So there's 2 2008s, 1 2007, 2 2006s. And most of the other clubs won't play anybody under 22, 23. So for us, we're a real trailblazer, and it's been really exciting. Of course, it's been very challenging. But yeah, that's basically the story, and that's where we are today.
Fantastic. And just so I want to make sure everyone listening understands, can you talk more about what a gap year is to make sure everyone understands? And then number 2, just dying to know, how do players get in front of you? How are they getting on this team? How do they get your attention?
Yeah. So basically a gap year is usually, pre-university, but some people will do that after university as well. Or some of the players on the program, just not interested in university at all. They might just say, okay, I want to be a pro, or they might be doing an internship or whatever, So essentially this program is for players who want to give their football a real shot for a full season. We actually do a half season program as well. For example, let's say you've committed somewhere for January, but you now have between now and then, and you want to go somewhere, then that's a lot of the players are in that situation as well. But some of the players who are on our program actually do study whilst being on the program as well. So in Dubai, for example, there's a lot of in-person universities. There's a lot of US universities, for example, NYU Abu Dhabi is here now. So of course that's quite far away from Dubai, but that just shows the level of universities that are here. RIT are here. We've got a partnership with RIT. So we had 2 of our players on the program there last year. But basically how it works is, let's say RIT Dubai, it's not a different university to RIT. It's basically like even the students who graduate from here can get their degree and their diploma from the graduation ceremony in New York. So it's, if players want to study, if players want to do an internship, for example, let's say a lot of players will want to do an internship in the coaching side, in the academy, or the media side. Of course, for us, we have around 600 players overall, girls, boys, men's, etc. So there's a lot to be done in the club. So if a player is interested in any type of internship, then they can also do that whilst being on the program as well. But in terms of how players can get in front of us, usually how it's done is through, like on our Instagram, for example, if you click the link in the bio, there's basically a link which says apply for the pro development program. You can put your details, you can put your highlight tape in there, and then one of our guys will be in contact. And we essentially, how it works is we'll go through like a coaches review board. So myself, the coaches will review each player's profile. I'll have a call with the player, to kind of qualify that they know what it is and things like that. And if they get to that next stage, then their video will be put in front of the coaches. And then should they, be accepted, basically, then they'll get an invite to join the program.
Fantastic. And,
Yeah.
you and I were talking before we got on this call, but I was looking through your brochure.
Yeah.
I want to join. Can you tell me more just about what a high level player looks like, what their daily schedule looks like, what they're doing with your program?
Yeah. So basically our program is kind of as full-time as it gets. So the standard, and as I said, some players are on slightly different schedules. So somebody who's studying in the afternoon, for example, we'll just move things around. But the normal program, let's say for someone who's not studying, will be the train in the morning on obviously our training facility. Then in the afternoon, they will either do a gym, which is obviously with our S&C. So everyone has their own individual strength and conditioning plan, or analysis. We obviously have analysts within the club and things like that. Or they'll do like a guest speaker, a workshop, an internship workshop, or they'll just do an activity. So for example, we have beach volleyball tournaments, paddle tournaments, et cetera, et cetera. So it's essentially like if you were to come on, like let's say, for example, how you imagine La Masia in Barcelona, where you go there and the players are living there. Of course, there's only a certain amount of hours that you can train. However, the other stuff around the training, whether it's the analysis, whether it's the gym work, whether it's getting exposure to the coach in the academy, all these things are really important. But then a lot of players will kind of ignore this fact because they're so obsessed with football. But you're also in Dubai, which is the #1 tourist destination in the world. So our players, when they have a day off, it's the paradise, basically. You can go and do whatever you want. So, I often see on the players' Instagrams, they're on jet skis and paddle boards and all that type of stuff. Basically it's a very serious program in terms of the level of commitment and the level of hard work that we expect when they're on here. But also, it can't be forgotten that you're in one of the most desirable places in the world whilst being on the program.
Slightly different from growing up in the UK, right?
Yeah, just a bit. Yeah, just a bit. No rain as well, thankfully.
So obviously, incredibly high performance atmosphere you're describing. Can you lean more and talk more about, if I'm a player in this gap year, what do IDPs look like? Are you doing film review? How are you growing me as a player in my time with you?
Yeah, got it. So every player, we have IDPs in terms of we have an IDP coach. So every 2 weeks, each player will meet with the IDP coach, and we essentially have PDF reports that we present to the players, which is based on their stats and comparing them to players at this level, players at the level above, players in the Premier League, for example. So always working towards kind of strengths and weaknesses on each player. But obviously, because of the fact that we, on this program, for example, we have 9 full-time staff. So we have 44 players, 9 full-time staff. So we've got, coaches, we've got analysts, we've got S&C guys, we've got specific IDP coach. So those IDP meetings will then lead into IDP sessions where they will then work on the things that they've highlighted as, the areas of weakness. So for example, let's say you're a striker and your left foot is your issue, then 5 strikers might have a session where it's all about shooting off the left foot. Things like that, which you basically can't get unless you're a top level professional with the ability to have access to all of these, amazing resources. But the difference is we're giving that chance to players who are looking for that opportunity to get to the next level. But one of the main things with our club is we obviously have the first team, which is directly above this team. So players that come into this program, let's say if you're 2007 and you came in this year, you would be technically registered with the under 19s, but you're eligible to play for under 19s, under 21s, B team or first team, depending on how good you are, how well you're playing, and the requirements, of course. So I'll give you an example of a player from Australia, came in the end of August, which is the start of the season, was registered with the under 19s. The first week, the 19s didn't have a game, so he played for the 21s, scored, moved up to the B team after the first kind of week or so, then was playing 2 or 3 games in the B team. Then the striker in the first team got injured. The manager wasn't too favored to the guy who was on the bench, and he said, let me see what else we've got, bring somebody else. So the 19s coach said, okay, let's just send him up there and see how it works. So he played in a friendly, And then he ended up being with the first team for 3.5 months. So then he went from being with the 19s to every day was training with the first team. He was a first team player. And something that's really important is, from our perspective, after the 3.5 months, we said to him, listen, as much as you like training with the first team and being on the first team bench, etc., we have to now get you back into playing 90 minutes every week, because it's all about development and it's about exposure. But at the end of the day, the development as an 18-year-old, he was just turned 18 when he arrived. As an 18-year-old is by far more important than, the chance of getting on for 30 minutes and scoring a goal and impressing somebody, because the way that we work is we have a lot of it's because of for example, the names associated with the club. It means that we can make phone calls whenever to get players trials. Like we've had players go on trial to Newcastle, Crystal Palace, Getafe, Austrian Premier League, the Pro League here, etc. Like we just had a player signed from the Pro League in January who came in September to Eric Abidal's club, Al Wassel. So for us, the exposure is not the issue. Like when we say to players, a lot of players will be like, oh, but I'll have more exposure in the first team. But it's like, you don't need to worry about the exposure, because if you're good enough, we already have the direct line to any of these clubs that we want to send you to. But the main thing is about the development. But take him, for example, he's a striker. At the time, well, still now, our captain is Leroy Fer, who's played hundreds of games in the Premier League. He's played in the World Cup. He's played in the Euros. He's 35 now. But the first half of the season, his centre-back partner was Julian Jean-Pierre, who was at Brentford 2 years ago. So this kid has gone from being basically in Australia, playing for a youth team, and now 2 months later, he's going up against these two in training when they're doing 11v11. So when you talk about that development environment and, as with anything in football, once you get there, it's basically sink or swim. We've got two 2008s who have been starting every game this year for the first team. And they were 16 and 17 when the year started. And one of them's actually committed to Dayton now. He's going to Dayton next year. Again, the kind of opportunity is there for players. Like now we've got a player from Hong Kong. This year he's been selected for the under-21 squad. He's another one who, well, he's with the 23s from Hong Kong now. He's another one who came in on the under-19s, then started playing all of his games with the B team, then went on national team camp. The B team realized how much they missed him. He came back in, they started winning again, and now for the past 3 weeks he's been with the first team. So the main thing I always say to players is that the first team in this club is not some mystical thing that you can never reach. It's basically, if you're a high performer in the B team and you're a young player, which basically puts you in a different category of player in terms of selection from the manager's perspective, because there's 3 categories here, which is basically old foreigner, young foreigner, and then local. Then you basically have to be better than the guys who are in that category above you in that position. And then if you are, you'll play. So yeah, it's one of those things where it's a really, really unique experience, and kind of we're proud to have made it, to exist how it does. And we're proud to kind of be able to offer those real life opportunities.
Well, it's especially impressive that you guys, as a player, you have a direct pipeline that you can see. There's an actual path, or like even in this conversation, you've mentioned 10 plus examples of success stories. And as a young player, that's fantastic to be able to see that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Can you talk more about, just in terms of the gap year, maybe some misconceptions that you have to work around when you're speaking to people about your program?
Yeah. So one of the main things we get is basically the NCAA eligibility stuff. And we've had a number of players who go after the program to then go to the US. Like, for example, we had a goalkeeper go on a full ride to UNF, North Florida. We've had plenty of players basically. And the way that it works is we can register the players as an amateur in a professional league, so they're not going to get paid, and therefore they don't have an agent, so they're not breaking any of the rules for the NCAA, which means that for us, we know, and we even recommend to players that this is not, you don't just come here and forget about the rest of your life, basically. You come here, you see what happens, but we need to keep as many doors for you open as we possibly can, which means that even from our perspective as a club, we register all the players that come in to this program as an amateur, because it means that on the other side, whether they get signed to a pro club, whether they go to uni, whatever happens, the process is very simple. When you register as an amateur, regardless of what league you play in, it basically means that if you and the place where you're going agree that you both want to go, there's nothing that the club who you're registered to as an amateur can do. As a professional contract, a lot of players will say, oh, sign me as a pro. But professional contracts are in there to protect the club. so that the club basically, because in the traditional sense, a club is usually investing in the player that for them to play for him, for the salary, whatever they're paying for, and therefore they can't risk that player just being taken at any time. Whereas an amateur contract for us is the fairest way, because it means that at any situation, let's say they want to go to uni, like I said, or they want to go to a different club, we want to move players, as many players as we can. We want to move them to different levels, whether that be to top schools in the US, where we can contact them and say, listen, we've had this guy, he's from America, he's 18, he's been playing in our first team for the past 16 games. Here's 16 full game clips in stadiums against top level professionals. How can they say no to that, basically? Or whether it's us moving them to a different professional club, but for us, it's not our goal to bring players into this program and then sell them, or to keep them within the club or anything like that. Because, the whole point of the program is each player is covering their own cost. So they're basically covering the cost to then get that opportunity. And we are here saying, we have the platform to offer to you. And the benefit of you coming is that we get a good player, if you're a good player, and then if we move you to a good team, like let's say, for example, these success stories I've just said to you here, then we get more good players to come. And then as a club, our reputation builds, and that's the goal. We want to be known as a kind of development hub. It's not necessarily about, making our B team the best B team in the world, because, we can't even get promoted to the first division because we've already got a team in there, so yeah, we like to have it as that kind of pathway up within our club to the first team, and then hopefully to a bigger club after.
So you've referenced development a couple of times, and I'm curious, do you have kind of a favorite underdog story, or someone that's come into your club that surprised everybody and now they're, doing something awesome?
Yeah, I mean, the player who I spoke about before, who's now training with the first team, and we actually got contacted from a professional club yesterday about him. He basically came in as somebody who everyone thought wasn't going to be able to play in Division 2, which is where our B team plays, because he's quite small. He's a very technical player. He plays a very neat and tidy game, which is perfect for the under-19s league. But the Division 2 is super physical, because most of the teams in there are feeder clubs for basically bigger clubs around the world, whether it be Europe or wherever, because it's really, really difficult for a European club, let's say a Premier League club. Even Premier League clubs would struggle to, let's say, go to Ghana and sign a player directly from Ghana, because the way the system works is difficult. Whereas if they move them to Dubai and then they get signed from Dubai to, let's say, a different place where they can go, let's say Belgium, Latvia, wherever, then they play a certain amount of games there, then they move them to the big clubs. So a lot of big clubs around the world have basically these teams in Division 2 and 3 where they host their best African talent. So these players are coming over who are 23, 24 years old, fighting for their life, fighting for the contract, basically. And, it's difficult league. It's super physical, super fast, super aggressive. And therefore, when you have a nice, technical, neat and tidy 18-year-old, there's a lot of question marks over whether they're going to be able to deal with that. But, some of them go in there and you think, wow, this kid's got heart. He's not nervous to get on the ball. He's been smashed 5 times in the last 10 minutes and he's still bouncing up and he's getting on the ball again. So there's plenty of kind of individual examples. But for us as a club, we have been an underdog since the start. We have, like I said to you before the recording started, we beat a team last year who has an insanely bigger budget than ours, and like some of their players would have been on tens of thousands of dollars a week, and our players are here for an opportunity, so when we beat a team like that, it feels, and I was playing in that game and it feels surreal. We scored a set piece in the 94th minute, but that was the game plan. We basically said, if we play this game open, we almost have no chance, because these guys, player for player, are a lot better than we are. But as a team, what can we do against them? So, yeah, as when we went up to Division 2, like I said, I remember there was a team in Division 2 whose manager was watching, and he said to our sporting director, just to give you a heads up, you guys are probably going to go down this year after what I've just watched. And the sporting director was like, okay, we've never been in the league, we've not watched it, let's see what happens. And then we won. But again, were we the best team player for player in that league? Probably not. But in terms of as a club, the standards have always been super, super high. Like the first 2 years in Division 3 and 2, we had Stephen Taylor as the manager, who has played 250 games in the Premier League for Newcastle. Then he went and played in the A-League, went and played in India. So he's such an experienced guy that he had us, so well drilled that we went into games with, a super specific game plan, and everybody stuck to it, and we won games that we shouldn't have won. And then the first year in Division 1, we had Neil Taylor, played for Swansea, played in the Euros for Wales. So we've always had these, top level coaches and top level, influences around the club, and everybody's there for the same goal. For example, for those guys, as a player, they have a huge name, but as a manager, that was their first job, both of them. So we were giving them the opportunity as a club, but that's how they saw it. But for us, we were saying like, wow, we're so blessed to be able to be coached by such a big name in football. But it goes both ways, because we fully buy into what they say and what they believe in, and then it turns into results for the club, because at the end of the day, they've got there for a reason. They're not just, it's not luck that you make 250 games in the Premier League. You know something about football.
That's just fantastic. What an amazing opportunity too, to be coached by some of those players. That's fantastic. And obviously you and I were kind of talking before the recording started, but gotta, love for you to share how you ran into us, Exact Sports, and how our two paths have crossed.
Yes. So we, as I said before, in the Middle East, we kind of help a lot of players go over to the US. So we do kind of showcases around Saudi, Qatar, Jordan, basically the places where there's never been a showcase before. And what we'll do is kind of different. We won't have the coaches, because of course the coaches aren't going to fly, 17 hours to see players who they, have never heard of. But for us, we will kind of try to help those players get placed at top universities in the US. But what we found is, of course, that when you're looking at these big D1s who have the pool of, for example, when I was at Furman, I remember speaking to my coach, and he said he gets around 500 emails a week from different players, so it becomes almost impossible for them to sort through those emails, which is why you have to get in front of the coaches, and you have to, attend these ID events and things like that. And we have a player called Omar, who's currently at George Washington. And I said that to him. He was playing at one of the biggest clubs here. He's an amazing player. And I said to him, you can definitely play Division 1, 100%. However, not from here. You've got to go over there and get yourself in front of coaches. So we looked around, and we were looking through all the ID camps, and we found Exact. And he went to one of the events, which would have been, what year are we in now? 2 years ago in the summer. And he's just finished his freshman year at George Washington. He met the coach. He had another 10 days in the US. The coach said, come and do a visit, see if you like it. And basically from there, that was the start. So again, a lot of the time, the player, for example, he was saying, how do I know that this coach is going to be watching me and all that type of stuff? And I said, well, first of all, they've already listed which coaches are going to be there. So who's there. And basically I reached out to all the coaches, and he did as well, just to basically say, Omar's going to be there. I'm going to be, I play here. I'm from this country, et cetera, et cetera. And then he went and met the coaches. In between games, he was introducing himself to all the coaches and letting them know where he plays and things like that. And then, the George Washington coach messaged me and said, like, you weren't joking, this kid's the real deal. So we're going to bring him for a visit. And that was it, So now, even in his freshman year, I think he started the first 5 or 6 games, and he's a top player, and I think he'll have a good future.
And one thing I love from this story especially is just about how Omar was advocating for himself. I think there's a misconception in the recruiting process that coaches are just going to find me. Scouts are going to find me,
exactly.
And what you were pointing out, it's just so important for players to stand up for themselves, have a social media presence, be comfortable reaching out to coaches. So I love that you brought that up.
100%.
Really important question here, Jack. When you think back to young Jack, what advice would you give your younger self now, just with everything now playing professionally? And,
I would say very similar to what you just said, actually. One of the things that my dad always used to say to me, and basically the exact same thing I told Omar to do when he was at that event, was you have to try your hardest to make people notice you before the game starts. And that's not from having dodgy haircuts or anything like that. It's from, going and introducing yourself, shaking the hand, spending, 10 seconds and do a bit of research before you arrive at those events. Like if you've got 10 schools that you want to speak to, for example, you should know the names of the coaches. You should know how their season went last year, all that type of stuff. And you should probably know how they play, and then you can find out whether you can fit into that system. So if you're going to, let's say, the George Washington coach and introducing yourself and saying, I'm Jack Shiels, I'm from the UK, I've seen that you've got 2 centre backs, both of them are tall, one of them's graduating, I'm also tall, et cetera, et cetera. All these type of little things, the coach is going to be like, wow, you've really done your research, what pitch are you playing on? And then suddenly you go from being just one of the 22 players on the pitch to now, okay, that's Jack who spoke to me before. So again, it doesn't guarantee anything, because if you have a bad game, then they're not going to, want to sign you. However, it kind of differentiates you from the rest of the players. And for me, I did that even when I was in college. I remember my dad said to me before I went to the States, he said, make sure that you introduce yourself to all the coaches of the other teams after the games, because you never know, basically what you're going to, how they could help you or how you could help them in the future. And when I transferred from my first university, which was a D2, I remember kind of 5 or 6 universities had spoken to me and said, I've heard about you from this coach at this university. And I was thinking, did I even play that guy? I don't recognize that coach's name at all. However, the impact of, let's say I've had a great game or I've had an average game, and then I go and introduce myself and say that, where are you from, blah, blah, blah. These little things, they go a long way. And of course, you're not going to, I'm not saying go and speak to the opposing coach if you've just lost 3-0 and it was a heated game and all that type of stuff. But it's about, being kind of available and letting yourself be noticed. And that's the same thing with the communication as well, especially for certain positions. I always say to the young centre backs on our team, for example, if you're a centre back and you don't talk, you're almost giving yourself no chance. Whereas if you're, like, for example, for me, I played over so many players who were much more talented than I was, just based on my intensity. I'd arrive in the warm-up, I'm already saying, come on, guys, I'm loud, and, and then the game starts. And when there's a player who's loud and feels dominant over the pitch, especially centre-backs and goalkeepers and things like that, you're only looking for them to basically do the simple things right, and then suddenly you have an amazing player. Whereas if you're someone who does the simple things right, but you're quiet and a bit, submissive and all that type of stuff, you go unnoticed and you've got no chance, basically. So that confidence needs to be there, even if it's fake. That's what I always say.
Great advice, especially for center backs. As a former college recruiter, I can confirm everything you just said. Again, thank you for coming on here today. And in closing, there's been a few times in this call that I've referenced your brochure, talked about your Instagram. How can people find you? Players need to go check out what you guys are doing because it's really special. How can they find you?
Yeah. So the number one place is the Instagram, which is just Gulf United FC. So GULF, not golf, Gulf United FC. And on there, you can find all the links. So to apply for the program, you just have to hit the link in the bio and then select Pro Development Program in there, and then you'll find it there. And then the website's gulfunitedfc.com.
Awesome. Well, Jack, again, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.